Welcome back to your Week 10 lecture on situational leadership. This is the second part of the lecture where we will focus specifically on leader behaviors and then have a short discussion of how leader behaviors align with follower readiness. As we get into this, it's important to remember that there are these two different types of leader behaviors. There are directive behaviors and supportive behaviors, and you'll recall this from some of our previous lectures, some of the work out of University of Michigan, Ohio State, about different leader types of behaviors, and really they can be broken down into these groups of directive or kind of one-way behaviors, and then supportive behaviors that are much more about two-way. So a directive, not surprisingly, by giving directions, but also establishing goals, how to achieve them, provided methods of evaluation and timelines, defining roles. This is about the specifics, the nuances of the job, whereas supportive behaviors are where you engage with group members or followers using two-way communication so that they can feel comfortable with themselves, coworkers in the situation. You're asking for input, you're problem solving, you're praising, you're listening, you're engaging them rather than telling them. The concept here in leader behaviors is that you need both of these, and you need to be able to do both of these to different extents, depending on the situational demands of the follower and where they are at in terms of follower readiness or follower development. Now let's again speak specifically about these directive or tasks behaviors. Again, defining roles, telling what, how, when, where. If there's more than one person, it's who's to do what, right? It's about goal setting and establishing timelines. It's about organizing, directing, and controlling, which is very different than the relationship or supportive behavior that we're going to talk about in just a second. Again, this is telling them how, telling them what, telling them when, telling them where, being very definitive and structuring their work life for them. Different than the relationship or supportive behavior where, again, the communication is more two-way or multi-way. It's about socio-emotional support, facilitating interactions, active listening, providing feedback. This is engaged leadership rather than the directive leadership. And really what you have are these types of leader behaviors. When you break it down into a matrix of high support versus low support and low direction versus high direction, what you see is this difference in style. So somebody who's starting in the bottom right, who has a high degree of direction, they're telling a lot, they're giving a lot of very focused and structured leadership without a lot of support, low support. That's a directing leader. That's just the person who's saying, do this, do that, and isn't really asking for questions or input. Then they transition still in high direction, somebody who's more high support with high direction, that's a coaching sort of role. And then you go over to the low direction side with high support, from coaching to supporting, and then ultimately low direction, low support is where you get a delegating style. And so that you see how this works and maybe kind of have some visual stimuli to go along with it, let's talk about them each individually. So directing, again, is the specifics. It's the who, the what, the where, the why, and the how. It's role definition. It's predominantly one-way communications. The decisions are being made by the leader. There's not a lot of, if at all, input from the followers about decisions. This is about close supervision and accountability, sometimes micromanagement, it feels like. It's about incremental instructions and keeping things very simple and specific. So I think General Patton here, he got this stick, his baton that he was famous for, and he's pointing to his followers, we want to go here, this is what we're going to do, right? And that's a directing sort of a leader. Whenever you are pointing the direction and telling people where and why and how things are going to get done, that's directing, and it's tied to a specific follower need, and we will talk about that. The second, again, is coaching. This is providing the who, the what, the where, the why, and the how. There's still a lot of direction here, but you're starting to engage in more two-way dialogue Uh, so you're explaining decisions and allowing opportunity for clarification. The decisions are still coming from the leader. These are the plays we're calling on the football field, but you're explaining why, and you're helping to explain the follower's role and things that they can be doing. You can ask questions to clarify their ability level. So you're not just telling them go do this, but you're engaging them a little bit more by saying, do you understand this? What about this? Do you understand how and when we need to do this and why? And then you're reinforcing small improvements. You're coaching them along the way. You'll see this sometimes on the sidelines in sporting events. A football game, you'll see a quarterback make a mistake, throw an interception. He comes over to the sideline, and the coach will get right up in his face. And it's a very intimate experience. Sometimes that coach has his face mask and he's yelling at him, but he often has his arm around him, or he'll swat him on the butt on the way out from their conversation. There's some sort of intimate interaction along with the hard-nosed coaching. Or on the basketball sidelines, you'll see the basketball coach with his arm around the guy, but his finger pointed right up in his face and in his nose, and telling him everything he did wrong. So as much as he's getting that direction right in his face, his coach has his arm around him, telling him, I'm here with you, I'm supporting you. So you can see how the two go together. And then you transition more into less direction and more support. Think of a kid learning how to ride a bicycle. That father still has his hand on that bicycle seat. He's probably coaching him along, telling him positive words and positive messages, telling him that he can do it, that he's going to be right there with him. But he's really leaving the pedaling up to the child. The training wheels are off at this point. So this is about encouraging input, actively listening. The decisions are more in the follower's hand, right? This child can steer this bike the way he wants to. This child can keep pedaling if they want to. So the follower, or the decision making, transitions more over to the follower in these contexts. There's, again, two-way communication and involvement at this level, and it supports risk taking. I mean, this father is helping his child ride a bike. There's a chance that this child can fall off and hurt himself, but the father's going to be there to catch him or to pick him right up if he falls. And then it's about complementing work. This father is giving some very positive messages to his child. You can do this. You can do this. You're doing great. Keep pedaling. You're doing great. And that sort of praise builds confidence, and especially as they're launching out kind of on their own for the first time. And finally, delegating tasks, giving them a sense of the big picture, and then allowing them to make decisions. There's relatively light supervision here. It's more about monitoring activities, reinforcing results, and remaining accessible. So you pass that baton. But if you've ever watched somebody in a relay race, when they pass that baton, the person who's passed it off, they run behind them for a little bit and make sure that they have the baton. And then once they pass it, they don't immediately stop. They slow down, but they go on the sidelines, and then they're cheering them on and want to see them finish. So it's I think an image that you can take in terms of delegating leadership, and really what it looks like is this situational leadership style matrix here, where you have this transition from, and you remember the D1, the D2, the D3, the D4 from our developmental readiness of the follower. This is the situational styles. The style is the S for the leader. So in this first quadrant, they have a high degree of directive behavior, low degree of supportive behavior. It's the directing. They're new to the task. You're giving them more directions. You're structuring it. And then it flows up and through coaching and supporting and delegating. It doesn't mean that you don't flow back and forth along this continuum. You might have to go from delegating back to coaching, or to supporting, maybe back to directing, and back and forth. But usually there is a fairly consistent, at least, trajectory or a flow towards delegating from directing. So you're starting with the more highly directive, lower supportive behaviors, moving into higher supportive behaviors until you are moving into lower directive behaviors, and then ultimately lower directive and lower supportive behaviors. And the tasks here, situational leadership in action, The first task is to assess, right? So you're going to identify the developmental level of the follower. So you're asking questions like, what is the task this follower is being asked to perform? Is it complicated? What is his or her skill set? Does she have the desire to complete the job? And then your second task as a leader is to adapt. So assess and then adapt. So once you've asked those questions, adapt your leadership style to the prescribed style in the leadership model based on their developmental readiness. The leadership style must correspond to the follower's developmental readiness level. That's the big key to situational leadership. Because if they need, they're in a position where they can be delegated to, they're highly competent, and they're highly committed, and they don't need a lot of direction, but you're still giving them a lot of direction, and you're still in their face a lot with a lot of support. They get annoyed. Sometimes they feel like they're being talked down to. Or if you're completely delegating to them and they need a lot of direction, they're going to feel really overwhelmed in their responsibilities. And so really what this model looks like is this. All right, so you remember this from our leader readiness. The D1 corresponds with S1. D2 corresponds with S2, D3, S3, D4, S4, right? So when they're in this high commitment, low competence, they go directing. When they are now in a low or medium competence but a low commitment, you go into coaching. They need the support. And then as their commitment starts to rebuild and their competence continues to rebuild, then you can go into a supporting sort of leadership where you don't have to give them as much direction, but you're just there to encourage them along, to reinforce what they're doing. And then finally, when you're delegating, this is again somebody who has high commitment, high competence. They don't need a lot of direction. Now, as we wrap up our discussion here, one final point I want to make, and I hope you don't overlook this. Notice this flow chart up and through here. As it begins and ends, and as it peaks, at no point do you see that there's a complete lack of supportive behavior or a complete lack of directive behavior. It's designed to be this continuum. You're always at least giving some direction, or always at least giving some support, if not a lot. But you're never all the way into support. You're at least giving some direction, and you're never all the way into direction. You're at least giving some support. So I hope that's clear to you, because an effective situational leader really needs both of these. It needs to be flexible to be able to adapt their style to the developmental readiness demands of the follower. It requires an individual relationship with your followers. It requires knowing where they're at, how they're at, what they're doing, what their motivations are, what's going on in their lives sometimes, to really fully assess and adapt. And if you're willing to invest in that at that personal level, you will be much more effective as a leader. You will have greater commitment and buy-in from your followers. They'll be much more open with you, much more engaged, and much more able to perform to the fullest of their abilities, because you'll be leading them the right way. So I want to close just with this quick quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. To handle yourself, use your head. To handle others, use your heart. Don't forget you need both your head and your heart in this. And if you do forget either one of those, then you're falling short. But if you put them together, and if you remember to put your followers out there and make sure you're with them and situationally engaged with them, you're going to be just fine.